Recently, the best chess player of all time, Magnus Carlsen, was asked by a young chess kid what was his least favorite chess memory. And surprisingly, it wasn't a loss, it was a draw. Here is how Magnus Carlsen explained it.
I played the World Youth Championship under 12 once, and I was leading before the last round. And I drew the game, and thus I lost the gold medal on tiebreak. And what I did after the game is I went to my room and I cried.
Wow, that was a tough one. Magnus actually never went on to win a World Youth Championship, and it turns out I have found the game. This is the game that made Magnus Carlsen cry, and it was in the year 2002 in Greece in the World Youth Championship. His opponent was actually David Howell, who he now works with a lot in the Champions Chess Tour, so it just goes to show you sometimes your enemies become some of your best friends. But let's take a look at this game. This is the game that made Magnus Carlsen cry. Now, there was not a huge moment, a huge missed opportunity by Magnus, but in this position, he is clearly better because this is a backward pawn. That's a weak pawn. There's a little bit of exposure around the black king, thanks to this h4, h5 push. There's a couple of weaknesses near the black king. And what Magnus really wanted to do was keep some pieces on the board. Now, I'm going to show you what he did, and I'm also going to show you what he should have done. I don't think he has a forced win, but he does have a way to keep a lot of pressure on the board. So, in the game, he played the move bishop to g4, targeting some of those light squares and of course targeting the backward pawn. Remember backward pawn? Yeah, you've done the ChessKid lesson. It's on a half open file. It can't advance easily, all that good stuff. Okay, now black played queen to f6, safeguarding the king a little bit. And after the move queen to e4, this was black's big opportunity. Queen e4, I'm going to call a mistake. That's probably the one Magnus wants back because it allowed black to pretty much take all of the life out of the position. Black played the move d5. Now this pawn is no longer backward, and this bishop, which was doing next to nothing, let's be honest, that bishop just wasn't a real chess piece. Now the bishop can trade itself off for one of white's good bishops, and that makes black's light squares much safer. Now, Magnus did take en passant, but then black just made a trade, and the queen took, then the rook took, and now the black rook is no worse than the white rook, so Magnus took. Black took back with the queen. Now, there are still a couple of weaknesses on the queen side, like this pawn. Magnus immediately went after the pawn, but then the very simple move queen to d5 check forced Magnus to trade queens, and we can actually just stop here. Yeah, they did play about 23 more moves. However, there's not much for white to play for here because even though these pawns are isolated, luckily for black, they are on light squares, which means they cannot easily be targeted by white's bishop. And although it was probably correct to play on, there just wasn't enough for Magnus to make any sort of breakthrough. So let's go back to our starting position. If Magnus was, I don't know, about 12 years old again and could play this game all over again, he might have chosen bishop to d4. Now this already sets up a trap. The trap is if black takes, then Magnus wins a pawn by force because he would take back with the queen. And the problem for black is that the king is not only in check, but this pawn is now pinned thanks to the fact that there's a battery on the d file, and bishop takes c6 is an idea. For example, if black just pushes, you can actually play bishop takes c6 because there are two attackers on the rook in case the pawn takes. Magnus would just capture with the queen. Now he'd be up in exchange as well as a pawn. So in this position, of course, black would not take the bishop, but Magnus would now be ahead by a pawn. He would probably retract the bishop and try to play c6. It's kind of like his extra pawn, and he has excellent winning chances here. I would say he probably would have won this position if it had happened. If we go back to this position, black could have actually blocked with the queen, but something very similar would happen. Magnus would trade queens, and then the bishop would still take because the pawn is still pinned, and Magnus would still, more than likely, win this game. Now, of course, black is probably not going to fall into that trap, but it's always nice when you make a good move. It sets a little bit of a trap. Black might make a move like rook to e8 or something, but now the problem for black is that once the rook moves or anything similar to it, once black leaves the d file to try to make sure this pawn is not pinned, it makes it much harder for black to free himself with this move d5. In fact, the computer's just saying, just play queen b4. Just play queen b4, aim at this square again, so now if black ever plays the move d5 for whatever reason, you can now just take en passant. It's a very funny position. The bishop can't take because it is pinned, And now if the queen takes, well, that's why we put our queen on b4. Our queen can take, and this bishop cannot take the queen. It is still pinned. Yeah, exactly. So queen b4, a little bit of a preventative move, a little bit of prophylaxis, stopping this move, pawn to d5. And black is just going to have a hard time solving his problems. This bishop is not a real piece. That pawn is backward. This pawn is weak in a lot of variations. And Magnus can continue to apply the pressure. We know that is what he loves to do. He loves to grind down his opponents. So there you go. There wasn't a super duper huge electric moment, but it was a good lesson that when you are better, try to avoid trades down into a simplified equal endgame. Keep the pieces on the board. However, if there is a chess game in history that's ever made you cry, welcome to the club, because that means you have an investment in the game, and we don't want to see you cry, but we do want to see you care about the improvement of your game. And if you want to get even better, make sure you subscribe to our channel, because hopefully I'll make you laugh a little bit more than cry.